The UK's Innovator Founder Visa can potentially be a minefield and raise a lot of questions for founders. Generally, entrepreneurship is a complex phenomenon. And as a result, startup visas that target entrepreneurs are not an exception to that statement. So, what we will be doing today is speaking to one of the directors of one of the 4 endorsing bodies in the UK who can issue letters of endorsement for the Innovator Founder Visa, Mr. Richard Harrison. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to both Richard and the Innovator International team for this video and for their time. What we will be doing is to cover every aspect of the Innovator Founder Visa, whether it's defining what innovation is, what is viability, what is scalability, what the endorsement bodies seek to see in an application. But most importantly, we will also look at the post-endorsement stage, because one of the common mistakes that a lot of founders make is they think that obtaining the first endorsement is the end of the road, and it's not. It's just the beginning. So we will cover everything in relation to the Innovator Founder Visa. We will also highlight some of the common mistakes that applicants make. And I deemed it would be the most beneficial to speak to the endorsing bodies themselves to hear their statements and what they expect to see in an application. So let's get into it.
Thank you very much. Well, it's my pleasure to be speaking to you today as well, and thank you for your time. Innovator International became an endorsing body in 2019 when we had the startup and the Innovator Visa. At the time, we were one of 65 commercial endorsing bodies plus the universities, so there were around 100 endorsing bodies in total. But endorsing bodies, they tended to cover a sector or a geographic region, and it was quite confusing for applicants who to choose. So in late 2022, the government ran a rationalisation programme to get 100 endorsing bodies down to 3. There's actually 4, 3 commercial plus a government-sponsored endorsing body. We were successful in that tender. And in April 2023, when the revised Innovator Founder route was launched, we are one of the 3 endorsing bodies that you can now apply to for endorsement for this visa route. Quite specifically, this visa route is often seen, especially by immigration specialists, as another option for migration. But if you believe what was said by Priti Patel at the time of the launch of the Innovator Founder route, this is not so much a route for migration, but a route for economic contribution to the UK. So what they're seeking are business propositions that have a strong chance of success, that will ultimately create jobs for UK resident people or bring money into the UK economy without displacing it from other sectors. Now, I'm going to drop that word in now because I'm going to come back to it later. Because, of course, the 3 criteria that they look for, which I'm sure we're going to focus on a lot in the next hour, are innovation, viability, and scalability. But to cut a long story short, we're an endorsing body. We tell the Home Office whether applicants meet the criteria or don't meet the criteria. We're the first port of vetting, if you like. And then when people get their visa, if they want, we also offer post-visa support, but that is totally optional.
Yeah, okay, that's fantastic. Yes, of course. With regard to the innovation, viability, and scalability requirement, I thought it would be beneficial to go through them briefly about the sort of concepts that the guidelines and the endorsing bodies, of course, expect to see. And then further on, we can delve into more details. And I would say specifically into the innovation aspect, but of course, notwithstanding the viability and scalability, as they're also critically important. So if you don't mind to give me an overview of what innovation, viability, scalability actually means.
Okay, well, of course, we've spoke about this many times, so we know. The problem is innovation, and innovation is my background. It's my my academic subject and my what I've worked in practice for about 20 years now. Innovation is subjective, and that's the biggest problem. But to me, and of course, the government brought on endorsing bodies to provide definition. Innovation is described in a very simple equation. Um, my definition is innovation equals something different plus someone who wants it plus someone who can sell it. And if you don't have all three components
Yeah,
there, then you don't have innovation. So we came up with some alternative terms to describe these. And I'll go through innovation
right.
first, because these are the exact words that our assessors use when they're assessing an application. And when it comes to innovation, we ask, firstly, is it sufficiently unique compared to alternative solutions? I'm going to go on to that one in a moment in a bit more detail.
Yeah,
Who is,
of course.
who is the target client base and how do they benefit? Could it be relatively easily copied without extensive research? And has the founder played a key role in the research, design, and implementation? And some people say, well, why does it have to be different? That goes back to my point on displacement. Now, when I worked for something called a development agency in the UK, which was a government body that helped build build up regions economically, socially, and so on, we always spoke about displacement. If you moved a large factory from one area to another within the UK, were you were creating jobs by moving that factory there, but were you also taking away jobs that already existed within that area? That's what displacement is. It's bringing something new in, but you're not really adding anything new because you're just displacing what already existed. And the purpose of this program is they want to bring businesses
Yeah.
into the UK that have intellectual property, but they don't want to do that with no net financial gain. They don't want to displace or put out of business the UK resident businesses that already exist. And a great example, we had a superb application from a packaging company saying, hey, we've got this amazing packaging solution. We want to bring it into the UK, but it wasn't substantially different to what already existed. And that would displace existing packaging businesses in the UK. So there's a lot about this term displacement, and that's why they look for something different. So they're adding new things to the economy, not just replacing what already exists.
Right, right. That's very good. And to be very honest, the concept of displacement does make it much more clearer, to be very honest with you. So really it I guess it highlights the point that this concept that each applicant proposes has to be very unique to the UK itself. And I guess this is where there's a misconception among many applicants that idea is innovative, then it's good. But it lacks, unfortunately, one of the common mistakes is that it lacks that UK context. And we will go into this one as well in more detail with regards to the concept validation for the UK market itself. Okay, so should we go into the innovation aspect? Because this is where a lot of, I would say, absence of clarity exists. Because, and one thing is I'm very, of course, I appreciate your explanation in terms of replicability and being new to the market. But because, as I've said, and of course, this is just my personal view, that because there is no, let's say, specified benchmark, so let's say an absolute requirement of IP rights, because it's not, I believe it leads to this sense of confusion among many applicants. So I would say it brings me to the first question, which is IP protection, and by IP protection, I think we're both pretty clear that we're talking about patents or perhaps copyright, because a trademark, let's say, unless it's something exceptionally unique, let's say in my previous business, my competitor was called student.com and they spent about, I think, 1 million on that domain name. So unless it's something of that nature, which many people will not fall under that category, would you say that IP protection is a must?
I wouldn't say it's, you've asked the $64,000 question there. It's a great question. I wouldn't say it's a must. However, okay, so what we always do, we always step back and look at the six um, settlement achievements. And by the six settlement achievements, for those who aren't aware, to get to the point of settlement, you need to have your business trading. It has to be sustainable, but you also have to achieve two of six settlement achievements. There's £1 million turnover, 500,000 with 100k export. There's one about job creation. Then, of course, there's one of them which is R&D that results in an application for IP protection. You
Hmm.
choose not to go down that path. I
Okay.
mean, I always think intellectual property is important. What is intellectual property? It's the property within that you create within your mind. It's everyone has it. But in terms of forms of IP, let's look at that in a little more detail if we may. R&D that results in something that can be protected. The protection bit is almost secondary. Now you can't protect copyright. Sorry, it's. Let me rephrase that. It says an application for protection. You don't
Hmm.
apply for copyright; it's automatically granted.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you can't apply for it, you can't use copyright under those specific rules.
Yeah.
Three forms you can apply for: obviously, patent or patent, as you've said. Design rights are a good one if you have something visual, but we do permit trademarks under certain circumstances. Now,
Hmm.
if you've designed a methodology, for example, that's come out of research and development, and that's where I'm going to go in a moment, and you give that methodology a title, and that title is intrinsically connected to the outcome of the R&D, then
Hmm.
a trademark is permissible. But what's more important is the R&D that goes behind it. So if for example, I said, hey, I'm going to trademark the name Innovator International, then there's no R&D behind that really. There's no R&D there, so I couldn't claim that. But if I said I'm going to trademark our maturity matrix, our business maturity matrix, which is a
Hmm.
specific tool that we designed and developed and tailored to assess any business application on a case by case basis, a lot of research went into that tool. So I could potentially trademark the name Business Maturity Matrix and have that as an eligible claim under one of the six settlement achievements. Now,
Okay.
what matters more than what you protect is the R&D that's led to it, because that's what they really want. They want the generation of new knowledge. So if you go away and you sit down and say, hey, what are we going to call this business? Let's scribble down some ideas and some logos. That's not really within the spirit of this output,
Yeah.
this specific target. But what we're looking for is typically, I say typically because there are always exceptions, scientific or technical knowledge being created. Now, that could be
Hmm.
social science. It doesn't have to be physical or biological or chemical science. It could be social science. It could be a teaching methodology. But there has to be genuine research and development that's gone into that. And that has to be at a substantial level, not just scribbling down a few ideas on a piece of paper. And I always think back, I don't know if it's the same from your education. But in the UK, whenever we had science classes, you always wrote down your science experiment and you started with a thesis and you went and did some experiments and you said what you'd
Yeah.
expect from the experiments and you looked at your results and then you do the experiment again with different inputs and you try and get to a point where you discovered something new. Um,
Yeah.
we're not talking about Bunsen burners and test tubes and everything here. We're talking about that methodology. And that methodology applies in software. Um, it's got to be the discovery of something that didn't previously exist, knowledge, a methodology, I mean, I couldn't say, for example, hey, I'm going to take these three existing methods and put them together to make a new marketing campaign because I've just put three existing things together. I've not created anything new. But if I'm creating knowledge that didn't previously exist, then that's really what you're looking for into this output, not specifically having a patent. But of course, what is that? It's intellect. You're generating intellectual property. A very
Right.
long-winded answer. I'm not sure if I've captured my
No,
point
no, no,
there.
no. It's very comprehensive. I mean, I thoroughly appreciate it, and I'm sure the viewers will really appreciate this because
They'll ask you if they
unfortunately,
want more information, which is brilliant.
yes, I mean, I'm glad we're recording this part, to be honest. So, really, to conclude, the solution or the process, it must have been developed by the applicant themselves. It should not use anything that already exists or is a combination of existing processes or solutions or design rights, as you said.
Yeah, I would say all of the. I mean, often there's a market opportunity that didn't otherwise exist, and you don't have to create something substantially different
Yeah.
in order to assess a new market opportunity. So sometimes there's a little bit of market innovation there as well. But certainly, if you want to go down the IP route, we're talking about the generation or creation of new knowledge. I would say the
Mhm.
majority of our successful applicants, and as of July 2025, we've had around, I'm guessing around 450 on the Innovator Founder Visa route. We've probably had about 850 to 900 in total since 2019. But the majority
Wow.
of them have come from the generation of new knowledge or a significant new market opportunity in some size, shape, or form. But I think we'll delve into this further as our session goes on today.
Of course, yes. I mean, I would say it, yeah, because I also work in the venture capital sector. So I'm a VC scout at the moment. So
Yeah.
I would say, in somewhat, it's also similar to what a venture capital firm would potentially look for. It's essentially, I believe, it lies on the
Yeah.
principle of barriers to entry,
Yeah.
so to speak. So, speaking of that one, it brings me to the next question because you also highlighted this, and this is also specifically clarified in the government guidelines. And that is, how is innovation broadly? Because we spoke about IP, but in a broad sense, how is innovation determined? Is replicability the key factor in place?
Okay. It's one of them. It's one of them. I mean, before I answer that question, I'm going to pop back to your experience as a venture scout as well.
Yeah,
And it's not, this isn't written in the rules, but if I ever want a sanity check, a self sanity check on a project, I will ask myself, if I was investing, would I invest in this project?
yeah,
Taking away any sector interests I may have, would there be purely on financial grounds, would I invest in this project? Because it asks you two questions. Do I believe the project's going to work? Do I genuinely in my heart and my head believe the project's going to work? And I think that's a key question. So that is one to bear in mind. But going back to your last question, sorry. So again, if I go back and when we talk about innovation and viability, there's a huge crossover between them. Because again, I said my definition of innovation was something new, someone who wants it, and someone who can sell it. Well, someone who
yeah,
wants it and someone who can sell it, that's sales and marketing. That's viability. So the two
yeah.
cross over closely anyway. So on innovation, we're just looking at, if you take those two components out, is it new? Now, if you say, is it new? What have you got? You've got an invention. An invention only turns to an innovation if you have someone who wants it and someone who can sell it. So, going back to the four questions we ask about innovation, is it sufficiently unique compared to alternative solutions? That's where we're really looking at avoiding displacement. Who is the
Okay.
target client base and how do they benefit? That's making sure there's someone who wants it. Could it be relatively easily copied without extensive research, which is really ties into your last question? And what we're looking for there is we've had a number of projects in the early days that were effectively website aggregators. And it said, okay, we've got this project. We offer, and I'm going to use a silly example because it just comes to mind, insurance. So you come on our website and we tell you which insurance broker is the best to use because they're all in one place on our website. And that's an aggregator. It's compare the market or there are hundreds of others out there. But all they're doing is pulling together existing information and not really offering anything substantially different. Now, you could easily say, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't exist within our marketplace at the moment. If it wasn't insurance, it was something else. But that concept of an aggregator is relatively easy to copy for any web company, anyone with IT knowledge, anyone with coding knowledge. So the Home Office haven't so much changed the rules. They've more added further definition over the last few years. And that definition has come as an outcome of experience. And one of the things that they have stated is the application, the subject should not be easily replicable. Now, they don't provide much more definition, but we interpret that as it shouldn't be easily replicable by the average person within that sector. So, I mean, anything's replicable. if you create this amazing piece of coding, Amazon could probably replicate it, or someone,
Exactly.
Microsoft, Apple could probably replicate it. So we put some reason to that, and we say it shouldn't be easily replicable without extensive research.
Okay, that's a very good point, and it nicely brings me to the next point about replicability because per my experience, and I would say you would probably agree that many businesses, even though they're viable concepts, they may not be able to obtain IP rights. So
Yeah,
let's say as a form of barrier to market entry. So and when therefore they may be replicated. So
yeah.
if they can be, and I will obviously highlight this in more detail, if they can be replicated, then does that automatically disqualify applicants? Because as you said, the point about the average person, it's a very good point, because
Mhm.
generally, any concept that's good, there is somebody with more business connections, there's somebody with more money. And I say somebody, I'm not even including the bigger corporates who could
Yeah,
who
yeah,
could
yeah.
just go and do it with far more resources. So if it can be replicated by, let's say, not the average person, but by a larger competitor with a lot of resources and industry establishment, then does that disqualify applicants? What's your
No,
perspective on that?
well, we've got to remember anything can be replicated. And,
Exactly.
and and getting a patent doesn't prevent it from being replicated. It just means that you
Unfortunately.
have legal grounds to pursue whoever's replicated it. So it's my belief that anything can be replicated. But what we're
Hmm.
typically looking at is projects that have a relatively low level of IP and can be easily copied without significant research and development. So again, I mean, that knowledge may be sector knowledge as well. I'm trying to think of an example off the cuff, and now I've put myself on the spot. I've got to think of one. Um, so yeah, it's going back to what we discussed before. If you come up with an idea, and I look at it and say, do you know what? I like that idea. It'd be quite easy for me to do. I just need to work up a website. Um, let's say you even if you've no, I'm not going to go down the path of designing something because that is quite different. You can get design rights on it. If you've done something that I can do quite simply, um, then we'd be saying, well, hang on a minute. It's quite easy for the average layperson to reproduce that project. And what happens then? The problem then, of course, if you have a load of copycats coming on board, um, you have competition, and that questions
Yeah.
your viability and it questions your scalability, especially if someone comes on board who's got more money than you and therefore can have a better marketing campaign. I mean,
Yeah.
the universe is littered with examples of where first wasn't best or first didn't win. Um,
Yeah.
and it's
Plenty. Yeah.
often
It's a
the
very
case
good
of
point.
supermarkets copying brands and just saying, "Hey, we're bigger than you. We can do it cheaper. We know more people come into our shop." So the problem with having something replicated is it brings in competition, and if it's easily replicated, it's going to bring in a lot of competition. Now, if what you do is that good, someone's going to replicate it. But if it's difficult to
Absolutely.
replicate, you're going to have fewer people copying, and therefore it has less impact on your viability and scalability.
Yeah, that's a very good point. What I wanted to mention, because we're discussing the theoretical aspect of it, of course, and generally what the policy is and what the definitions are. But I personally believe that actual examples can,
Yeah,
make everything a lot more clearer. So I'll use the example of my previous startup, and
brilliant.
I will, for the viewers and for you as well, perhaps, I will explain what it was. So it was an accommodation booking platform, similar to Booking.com, perhaps, but it was specifically targeted to international students. And this point about replicability, unfortunately, it's a lesson that I learned the hard way, because as soon as I launched, there were these, numerous other players that came into the market and copied that concept. So perhaps on that end, it's arguable that it was easily replicable. But, and this brings me to another question, which I didn't include in the list that I sent to you, but I believe it would help. And that is the question of partnerships, because
Yeah.
in many cases, businesses may rely on partnerships to get that solid market entry for their concept. So let's say with my accommodation booking platform, on the surface, it could be easily copied. You needed a website and you needed some contracts with the accommodation providers, although they weren't really easy to obtain. But we'll say, for the sake of argument, it was easy to obtain. However, what I would do is I would go and approach, let's say, 30 universities in the UK, because it's not exactly easy to establish such partnerships, especially with public institutions in the UK, I would say. So I established these partnerships with, any 30 universities, and they listed our website on their website stating this is the go-to place for
Yeah,
finding private student accommodation. Would that potentially make a difference? What do partnerships, do they play a
absolutely.
role in terms of
Absolutely.
replicability?
Well, two things play a role there, Sohrab. Well, sorry, let me say a number of things play a role. There's some information I've not got, so I'll throw it in anyway.
Yeah.
But firstly, so the first thing we do is we would look at your project and we'd say, well, okay, accommodations for students, we're sure the things exist. We'll go and do our own research and so on. But you've got a few things there. Number one, you're in a unique position within the universities to be able to roll that out. And it maybe you said, look, hey, I'm in this university at the moment. They've agreed for me to do a pilot with the university. It's always great to start in your local area and grow out. It's an easy way to grow and expand. My university has offered to give me a pilot program here to try and they trust me because I'm a student here. I've got
Mhm.
unique access to the university, whereas all of these other national players, they don't have that personal contact. So I go back to a phrase I love, the pain point. What's the pain point with the current system? And how are you addressing? If there's no pain point, you're not addressing a problem, and people, especially other universities who don't know you, aren't going to leave their current supplier if they have one. But if you can identify a pain point, and that pain point may be that, and I'm really just throwing examples here, it may be that, well, okay, these systems work for UK residents who have a UK address or a UK family to fall back on or whatever. But international students coming on, they can't give a UK based guarantor. They can't do this. They can't do that. They may not have a UK bank account. So if you're identifying all these failure points that you're suddenly solving, that's the first thing. But the second thing that I haven't mentioned, the first thing I would do is look at your CV before I open
Yeah.
anyone's plan. I'm not an assessor at the moment because I'm focused more on building our accelerator program. I'm not assessing projects actively at the moment, but I have done a few thousand, so I can speak about this. When the first thing I do before I open a business plan is open the CV, and I look down the CV and I say, okay, what's this person's experience and what am I expecting? And it always rings an alarm bell when someone, and I don't know your background, so I'm going to make this up totally. If it says, hi, I'm Sohrab, I've got experience for example, computer technology. So I'm a computer expert. I'm a very, very good coder. I'm from the UK. I've always lived in the UK my whole life. And I'm now going to design this system for international entrepreneurs to find housing. And I'm thinking, okay, you're a coder, so you could probably code things well, but you've got absolutely no knowledge of international entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Clearly you have, but in this example, you haven't. Um, you've got no experience of the housing industry or how that works. You've always lived at home with your parent or parents, and you've never had to rent accommodation. So you're sort of trying to solve a problem without really understanding what the problem is.
Yeah.
So a genuine understanding of the problem, um, a genuine identification of a pain point, and a solution that works. Someone who wants it and someone who can sell it. I think are really really the key things there. And I mean that project that you came up with. I think we have clear yeses, we have clear nos, and we have projects that are somewhere in the middle where we want to ask more questions. So if you were identifying this was a real pain point for international students, you had the solution, and at least your university was interested in a pilot program, then for me, you're going in the right direction with that application.
Yeah, that's very comprehensive, I would say. And perhaps to highlight a point, the role of the founder, which we will shortly go into, which I would say I would place it under the viability section. The individual behind the business, I guess this would be a cross section again between innovation and viability, because it's about what the founder is offering. So let's say, I mean, this is one thing I really relied on the startup, which was that, I'm an international student from a non-English speaking country, even though I could speak English from since I was 6, but technically it was that
Yeah.
idea that a lot of students may also struggle with English, and at
Yeah.
least conversational
Yeah.
English. And can I'm able to build this trust with this audience, because I say, I guess in a way, it's the same thing I'm doing now with this consultancy, which is that,
Absolutely.
I've been an entrepreneur in this path and I've obtained British citizenship through it. So I pretty much know the process. So the role of the individual is very important, isn't it? It's about
Absolutely.
who is behind the concept. I would love to hear more of your thoughts, and we will shortly go into it. But just one last question I had on the innovation section, and that is, a lot of applicants, especially, the age of AI now, because, every
Oh,
startup
yeah.
has some AI element, ranging from, designing their own AI concept to just simply using an AI chatbot. I mean, they're all pretty much falling under the AI startup notion. So a lot of founders, they may use third-party technology.
Yeah.
So let's say an API through ChatGPT or Google Gemini, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
So what's your stance on that? Does that, I mean, I'm not sure if the word disqualify is the right word, but
No, no.
does that
Well,
reduce the innovation spectrum?
it's a great question, and one I was thinking about last night as we update our guides for assessors. A
Yeah.
couple of months ago, when we started receiving plans written by AI, the timing of this is great because this is going to go into the founder further downstream as well in this conversation. Um, we received plans wholly written by AI, and we said straight
Mm,
away, it's AI plan that it's not genuine from the founder. But we're at a point now where AI is moving so quickly, it's almost, I don't want to use the word ignorant because it's or foolish because everything is different on a case by case basis. But some of the best founders are using AI to solve questions, to answer questions, to solve problems.
yeah.
Um, I mean, only yesterday I wanted to draw a flow diagram and I just couldn't get it straight in my head. So I explained the diagram to AI and poof, it came up with the perfect diagram for me. So using AI does not disqualify you. But there's two
Mhm.
types of AI. Using AI to write your plan, which is okay in context, and using AI within your business. Now, this is all down to timeliness. About a year ago, people started applying to us with AI bots for websites, or the number of AI bots for the legal sector we've had that allow you to ask a question and it just takes into account millions of case studies and gives you the perfect answer. A year ago, all these applications, not all of them, the best of these applications would have been granted because they were unique at the time, they were new at the time. Now AI
Yeah.
has progressed so much in 6 to 12 months, we have to say, okay, at the point of application, what is commonplace, what is unique, what is different. So an application today and an application in 2 months' time may be assessed totally differently because of the amount the market's moved. But
Of course.
on the other hand, and this is a big one, we get a lot of people, we get buzzwords that go around regularly, and AI, VR, crypto, blockchain, um,
Yeah.
all of those. AR is what I was trying to think of then. Natural NLP, all of these phrases, they're buzzwords, and certain people try and get them into their plans, and they'll say, "Hey, I'll use AI to do this." But they won't tell you why they're using AI, what benefit AI will actually deliver, and you get the impression they don't actually understand AI. Um,
Yeah.
by example, they're simply throwing it in to say, "Hey, I'm throwing the word AI into my plan, so it must be innovative." So we were
Yeah.
very cautious about the use of AI and the use of buzzwords, but where there's a genuine purpose for it, and that purpose is explained and it does provide something sufficiently different at the point of application, then AI is fantastic. AI is, I think for me, I did an article on this a while ago. But for me, the two things that are going to change business substantially over the next few years, AI quicker than internationalization, are those two things. Number one, the introduction and use of AI, and number two, internationalization, people working across borders more freely now, which are
Yeah.
brilliant things. But if you don't respond to them, you're going to fail.
Yes, that's a good observation, I would say. So let's say my take from your remarks so far on these notes, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my note is that there is no single factor that may qualify or disqualify the applicant, but it's a unique combination of factors based on the
Absolutely.
founder's personal and I would say commercial circumstances
It's a
surrounding it.
story.
Just one thing that which I have seen in the guidelines. I'm pretty sure that I've seen this part, and I believe it would help the viewers, and of course, to have your confirmation on it. And that is that if founders are outsourcing, let's say, because there's
Mm.
a great deal of these concepts will be tech based. So if they are outsourcing the innovative element, then that disqualifies them from passing that innovation threshold. Because let's say, for example, I have business experience, right? So I've been an entrepreneur, but what I want to do is I want to develop an AI tool for anything. Let's say risk management, for example,
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't have a CTO who has equity in my business. So I'm outsourcing this to a third party agency, let's say as a freelancer, or I'm
Yeah.
paying them a fixed fee to develop it. Would that disqualify me from applying?
Okay. So, as always, there's not a very simple yes no answer. And everything's done on a case by case basis. But what we have a challenge with, so let's break down innovation into two or three components. And the first component is, let's say, identifying a problem. And the second is solving the problem conceptually. And then the third is realizing the problem. So turning your conceptual solution into a physical solution, whether that's software or a product or whatever it may be. Um, if we get an applicant that says, "Hey, I'm gonna develop a risk tool to help people manage risk better using AI," and this third-party software company is going to do it all for me, then we'd be saying,
Mhm.
"Well, what are you really adding to the equation?" It's almost as if you've identified a theoretical problem and then you've gone to a third party and said, "Design me a solution for this problem," but you haven't really thrashed out the problem. Now, not everyone's a coder, and employing's not always the best solution either. I mean, we would never employ a coder for our CRM or whatever. We subcontract. It's the nature
Mhm.
of business. It's the nature of good, sensible business. So it's different saying, "Hey, design me a something that manages risk," than it is saying, right, I've designed this solution for risk. I want it to do this, this, and this, and I want it to engage in this way, and this way, and I want this system to talk to this system, but it's going to have to integrate with, Microsoft Excel and Apple numbers and so on. Um, and then giving that specific spec to a coding company. That's quite a different thing. And we're speaking to a
Yeah.
number of companies at the moment that help people code solutions.
Mhm.
We have a problem with that. But we have a problem when the person comes up with a very theoretical problem and asks a third party to design the solution, code the solution, implement the solution. So there's nothing wrong with subcontracting certain parts of your business, but we'd want to see the majority of the intellectual property generated by the applicant.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, again, in your risk example, and I know this is what you do. You'd say, "Oh, okay, I've spec'd out this solution. This is how I want it to work. This is specifically what it's got." So you've designed a solution, but you can't personally code it. You need help with that. That's not a problem. It's when you're not designing the solution and you're saying to a third party, "Design me a solution. Here's a theoretical problem. Design me a solution, make it for me." And you're basically just offloading all of the IP generation as well.
Okay. So basically, there needs to be that balance between the theoretical
Absolutely.
and the practical, so to speak. Okay,
Absolutely.
that's amazing because I know for a fact, through speaking with clients, that this is an area that a lot of people struggle with, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so again, I mean, thinking of an actual example here, what we're not looking for is this is a
They,
problem. Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
Oh, I think we disconnect for a second. We're
That's
back.
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, as I was saying, unfortunately, it's a problem that a lot of applicants have because they are, they're genuine entrepreneurs. They have good concepts, but they just lack that coding and that technical knowledge. But they check all the other boxes, so to speak. So that's, I really appreciate you clarifying that part.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, the big thing is, I think of applications we receive, and let's say for the sake of we get a load for um, intelligent products to help elderly people in their home. And they describe a generic problem, they describe a generic solution, and they say,
Mm,
someone's going to manufacture this for us, or someone's going to code this for us. But we just need more detail on the solution. On that, we need to know that you've designed the solution, not just come up with a generic concept.
okay, okay, that makes perfect sense. So that brings me pretty much to the next section, which is viability. And by all means, I mean we can go with the list of questions that I have, but by all means, I mean the mic is yours, so please feel
Okay.
free to add anything
Okay.
in
Well,
there.
I think in all honesty, once you've addressed innovation, you've addressed 80% of the situation anyway, because as long as we ask, is there someone who wants it and someone who can sell it? What we're really going on to in viability, and let me just go back to my LinkedIn article and tell you what the assessor asks for viability. They're asking four questions. Number one, is there credible demand? And we're
Mhm.
not talking about, an internet article that said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if dot dot dot. But we're talking about genuine demand from genuine buyers. Have you spoke to people to find out whether this really does solve their problem or solve a problem they have and that they'd pay for it? So is there credible demand? Does the applicant have a suitable and relevant skill set? That's where we go back to the CV. And we're not expecting everyone to be a seasoned entrepreneur. Far, far from it. But on the other hand, you're not going to sell a solution into the NHS if you've got no idea how the medical sector works. So some relevant, suitable experience. I mean, it may be that a student has worked with the NHS on developing something on a student project, and they've started to develop an understanding of how the supply chain there works, or how this works, or how that works. But again, if you have a coder who says, I've designed a solution for all the doctors in the world and we're going to sell it into the NHS, no, you're not. Not unless you know how the NHS works. Example. Okay, so the third point, are the project aims realistic? We expect some sort of project plan that says I'm going to do A, B, C, and this needs the following resources. That may be equipment, it may be people, it may be money. And do they have those resources available? Which ties into the fourth question: can the applicant actually fund the project? So, four things: demand, applicant skill set, are the project aims realistic, and can the applicant fund the project?
Amazing. Okay, that clarifies a lot. So, the questions that I would have in line with that, and by all means, my apologies if they seem very basic, but
No, I love these
my
questions. Fire away.
I mean, my goal is to record this video in a way that it's applicable to everybody, so to
Yeah.
speak. So whether they're graduates with their first business venture or they're seasoned entrepreneurs with 10 million in venture funding. So regardless of that. So the first question I would have is, how can a founder demonstrate their competency to make the project a success? And you mentioned that you would look at the CV first, but is there any
Absolutely.
specific remarks that you have about that will help
Um,
applicants demonstrate
well,
it clearly?
the CV gives me an idea of their experience and their background, but that's always complemented by what's in the business plan. And in the business plan, I'd expect you to tell me how you're going to do what you said you're going to do. So, for example, if we're working with, I'll carry on the example of NHS. If we're working with the NHS, and I said, well, okay, I need access to the NHS, so I'm going to work with the NHS innovation hubs in the UK. And I've already spoken to them because they will help me develop the skill set that I need. Or in your case, with your project, it may be that okay, you may have said at the time, I'm not a seasoned entrepreneur, but I've developed a solution. This is how it works. And I'm working with my university's placement team or whatever it's called, housing team, in order to access the market base. So it's the story you tell us. What you want to do, you want to treat a business plan like a story. And when you
Hmm.
read it, you want to believe it. You want to be able to believe it and say, hey, I'm with this guy. I believe him. I think he can do it. But if you're
Okay.
reading it, and we've had examples where um, we've had someone who's been an administrator in a certain sector, an admin assistant, for example, or a receptionist, and they've come up with a really high-tech solution for that sector. And that solution's been, well, there's a 99% chance it's been created for them because their background and the way the plan's written doesn't provide any
Right.
so they can do it. You read it and you think, yeah, this story's okay, but I'm not really buying into it. I'm not buying into it in my head. And the business plan, it's a story. I want to buy into someone's story and believe that they can do it so much that I want to jump on the ride with them and be with them through that whole journey. So, yeah, it's demonstrating their competency is a function of what they put in their business plan and what they put in their CV. But
Yeah,
ultimately, other people can write business plans for them. And they can
we'll go
also
into that.
read
Yeah.
the business plan so well, they can articulate it well. So this will always accumulate for potentially successful applicants. The last step is a verbal interview over a video interview over Zoom, where we quiz them a bit more about their business plan, just to make sure they did actually write the document and can deliver it themselves.
Yes, that's a very, very good point. I would say perhaps building on that point of, the business plan being an engaging story which you want to buy into, then perhaps it's accurate to say that when a prospective founder has lived through the problem, it gives them that ability to sell that story very well,
Absolutely.
perhaps. So therefore, I mean, this kind of answers my next question as well, but for the sake of viewers, we'll clarify it clearly. So perhaps lacking direct entrepreneurial experience previously, it doesn't automatically disqualify applicants.
No, not automatically, no. Although I would say that people with, if you looked at this statistically, and I've not done this, but I'm guessing, if you looked at people with or without entrepreneurial experience, I would say there's probably a higher success rate if they can for those who can demonstrate some entrepreneurial experience. It's just
Mhm.
natural. But I'd also say there's probably a greater success rate in the execution of the businesses themselves, in the commercialization within those people. They could probably do it in a shorter time frame because they've done it before and they know exactly what to do. Whereas someone without that experience is learning first time. That curve is obviously a little bit steeper, but it doesn't disqualify them. Far from it.
Okay, okay. So it really comes down to the skills itself, really, doesn't it? Because I think the
Absolutely.
NHS example that you mentioned, it's very good because let's say I'm I have a concept relating to the NHS, for example.
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor, I haven't really worked in it, but I've done a project, for example, where I've understood, let's say it requires procurement, for example, for the
Yeah.
NHS.
Yeah.
I've learned about the processes, etc. And I can demonstrate the skills that are required to make the project a success. So perhaps it boils
Yeah.
down to that ability rather than necessarily being an entrepreneur in the past, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing as well, moving on to that is it also comes down to the specific problem because what we would expect is someone to explain the problem and the pain points in detail, but also on a competitor analysis. It might be. I mean, I went into hospital once and I was there overnight with one of my children for something relatively minor, and all night the toilet there was water running down the back like a tap that had been turned on slow, and I thought
Mm,
that's just a washer that's gone. But how much water is that wasting? And when you take that into account across the whole hospital, what's the cost of that waste? And I thought
yeah,
if you could get someone to go into hospitals and just fix those little jobs, you'd probably save thousands of pounds a year. And
yeah,
if I put that forward as a project, well, okay, it sounds feasible. But when I spoke to someone in the NHS or who's very well connected to the NHS, they said there's so many of those things all over the place. And when you put those losses into the mass collection of losses that happen through the organisation, it's so minor, they'd never take you up on it. It would be more hassle than it's worth from an administrative point of view, which is a sad thing because there's money to be saved there for a business
Yeah.
that the public are paying for. But we'd expect that level of investigation and knowledge that says, yeah, this is a real problem and I can solve it.
Yeah. And they'll buy it, of
And they'll
course.
buy it. Exactly. That's
Yeah.
it. Yep. Somebody wants it, somebody can sell it.
Yeah, unfortunately, because a lot of people they tend to, well, I mean, in this case, it's a valid problem, but a lot of founders they pretty much provide a solution to a non-existent problem, perhaps. So,
Absolutely.
and that's the first step to determine that people will specifically not buy it. Okay, so the other question, we covered this one as well, but for the sake of clarity, which I had it on the list here, which was if a founder lacks the technical skills to run the project, but they have the good concept, then can they still run it? But I guess we would be repeating ourselves on this one because I think your explanation was quite comprehensive, and that is that needs to be that balance between practicality and theoretical aspects.
Absolutely. There's no problem outsourcing certain elements, but
Hmm.
you wouldn't expect to outsource the whole project. So again,
Right.
it's just finding that balance and I mean, there is no clear guideline or yes and no here. There's no problem having someone do a part of it for you, but you're expected to do the majority, particularly where the intellectual development is involved.
Okay, absolutely. Okay. And lastly, on the viability note, of course, if you have any more remarks, I would be truly grateful to hear them.
Absolutely.
What funding do, because the investment aspect was one of the questions that you mentioned. So what funding do applicants require? I mean, I know the answer to this question, but for viewers' knowledge,
Yeah, yeah,
what's
yeah.
the funding that they're required to
Okay,
demonstrate?
so of course it used to be nothing for the startup and £50,000 for the Innovator Visa, but the problem with that was some projects, highly complex projects, needed a lot more, whereas simplistic projects needed a lot less. So in someone's business plan, we'd expect to see details of their costs and their expected income, and a point at which the business becomes break even. Now,
Okay.
before that point, of course, they're incurring a loss. They've got costs. They're probably not selling or selling low volumes. Um, we expect the business to be able to fund itself to a position where it is sustainable. And sustainable effectively means making a profit or at least not making a loss. Now, I'm always cautious because I don't think in 2 or 3 thousand plans we've ever seen one that's financially gone to plan. Entrepreneurs always over egg their forecasts and they're always overly ambitious. So I'd obviously say, if a company thinks it needs £50,000 to get to a point where it's sustainable, probably a bad number to pick that because it's the number from the last visa program. Let's say £80,000. If a company needs £80,000 to get to a point where it's sustainable, they have to provide that £80,000, and ideally, it's good if they can do that and a little bit more because it's very unlikely that they stick to plan. There's always in project planning, in Prince 2 project planning, there's always a 20% contingency recommended. So if they need 80, I'd say if they've got close to 100, they're probably in a good place, but they need to have that money ready and available and be able to demonstrate that they've got it. Now, that could be grant funding, it could be their money, it could be money from friends and family, but they need to explain to us where that money's come from. They need to evidence that it exists. And if it's coming from someone else, they need to explain the conditions associated, whether it's loan, it's investment, what equity share is, what repayment terms are. Um, what they can't do is say, I'm going to raise money when I get to the UK because there's this perception that getting investment is easy. And as you know, it's far from it.
Yes, unfortunately, it's a true misconception, so to speak. So the key principle is that there needs to be a liquid cash. It
Absolutely.
cannot be prospective earnings.
Yeah.
And this brings me
Or,
to a one. Oh,
so
sorry.
it also can't be a house that I might be able to sell in 6 months' time. It has to be liquid cash. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I mean, this brings me to one specific scenario because I've dealt with this scenario very recently. And let's say, because a lot of people who apply for this visa are actually recent graduates who are on the post-study work permit. And in those 2 years, they've launched a business.
Yeah,
So let's say I'm a graduate. And
yeah,
in those 2 years, I've launched this business, and now I want to apply for the Innovator Founder Visa. Now, my business has shown a steady revenue of 2 grand a month
yeah.
for the past 12 months, and I need, I don't know, let's say £36,000, and I don't have all that funding in liquid form. Can I use the earnings, let's say prospective earnings, as a benchmark if I can evidence that the business has
Yeah,
achieved this?
absolutely. It's
Okay.
genuine income to the business, so absolutely. I mean, your cash flow forecast will take that into account, and it'll show a shortfall, and it's the shortfall that matters. So if you've got money coming into the business, yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. You use that with the obviously you have the risk that if that stops, then you need to find that money from somewhere else. But then yeah, it's income. It's genuine money
Okay.
coming into the business. The only thing I'm always cautious of in that example is and of course, there's no challenge with this, is that the project actually meets the criteria for innovation.
Right.
Let's just assume it does. So yeah, no problems with that whatsoever.
Okay. Okay. It's brilliant. Okay. I mean, the tricky thing, unfortunately, with this entire, I would say, phenomenon of entrepreneurship is that each founder's circumstances are so unique. And
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
guess my goal in this video was to highlight as many possible scenarios. Of course, there's always some unique case which we may not be able to highlight, but that's pretty much the goal. And I really appreciate your notes so far. I believe it brings a lot of clarity. So I was going to say that, I think on viability, we've really clearly highlighted what Innovator International expects to see, and of course, what the spirit of the government guidelines is all about. So, if you don't have any more remarks, I'll move to the scalability
Yeah.
aspect because I
Okay.
have some questions that I believe can really, really help applicants. So, the first one I want to start with is what is a scalable business? I mean, is there
Okay.
a benchmark? How do you define that?
Okay. So this is a bit of a funny one because the actual definition of a scalable business is a business that grows in a disproportional manner. Its profit grows um, in a greater way than its sales alone. So the sales curve might go up, but the profit is due to go up at a disproportional value. That's probably not a very useful definition because it's not the one the government actually use. Um, what we're really talking about here is businesses that will have some size and magnitude to them. So we're talking about growth really, rather than we're talking about high growth rather than genuine scalability here. And the purpose for this really is so if we go back to the purpose for this route and that being economic contribution rather than purely increased migration, what we're looking at are businesses that will have some magnitude to them. And this is really captured within the settlement targets. So again, we're talking about if we look at the settlement targets, three of them in particular, we're talking about businesses that'll turn over 1 million or 500,000 with a 100k export, or they'll create 10 jobs or 5 jobs at certain levels. That's the only place at which scalability is formally assessed through the
Mhm.
you know the ongoing um, settlement process. Now, what we have to assess at the point of application, whether the business has ambition to grow into national and international markets, and whether it's going to employ now, and ideally employ UK nationals. Now, we do get rare occurrences where a business doesn't need to employ to any great level, but nearly every business, as it grows nationally and internationally, it brings in more money, but it needs more people because there's more work to do. So
Of
what we're
course.
really looking at here is what's the ambition for the business moving forward over, let's say, a 5-year period? How is it going to grow? How is the income going to grow? And what staff are needed to support that growth. So, we've had applications before where we've had, a single founder doing something, and they've said, hey, by the end of year three, we'll be doing 60K a year, which is okay for sole trader. So it might be okay for a consultant, but that's not really a scalable business, because when you think about it, how many people can you employ with income, not profit, income of 60K a year? You're looking at yourself, and at best yourself and maybe one other person, depending on your operating costs. I've always said, rule of thumb, a business should generate £100,000 per employee. So a good consultant would generate £100,000 a year. A 10-person business should generate minimum of £1 million a year.
Hmm.
Just it's a rule of thumb based on my observations through experience. But what we're looking at here is ambition, and also sufficient reason to back that ambition, that this business will grow from a revenue point of view and will need to employ people at some point to support its activities.
Okay, yeah, that brings a lot of clarity to it because, and correct me if I'm wrong again. Would you say that the settlement criteria, the 2 out of 6 that applicants need to check, would that be I would say it's the solid reference point to determine
Absolutely.
scalability,
Absolutely.
right?
It's a great benchmark. And again, we may read a plan and we think, well, okay, it's innovative. It is probably viable. If it's viable, it might be scalable. But do I genuinely believe that they're going to do 500K or 1 million or employ five
Mhm.
or 10 people? And obviously, there are other criteria. I don't like the criteria that's about doubling your business. We can go into that separately if we need. But there's the IP, there's the 50K invested. But see, again, you've hit a point here, because we've got people coming to us at the moment, immigration specialists, saying, "Well, look, they've put 50K in, and they've secured, they've got a patent. They haven't got any turnover. They're not doing any business, but
Mhm.
they've put 50K in, and they've got a patent. And therefore, you have to give them ILR." Well, no, we don't, because they're additional targets. The fundamental targets to do with settlement, or achieve, I think they call them achievements. Um, to get the same business, you must make progression. To get ILR, you must make achievements. And these achievements involve the business being active, trading, and sustainable, and significant progress being made against your last endorsed plan. So, we take those financial forecasts as a measure. And whilst we don't expect you to precisely or exactly achieve them, we do want progress against those achievements. So, in terms of scalability, you're setting your own benchmark when you give us forecasts.
Yeah. So I would say a very important point to reference here, and which is what I always stress to every applicant, which is that they need to develop realistic financial projections, because as you said, it's the founder's habit to exaggerate everything, because especially first time founders, they think everything will go great, everything will be fantastic, and they set up these unrealistic financial projections. And this is, I would say, this will go into the post endorsement section that we'll talk about, but they fail to actually achieve them.
Yeah.
So that sense of realism is quite important, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, that I think that answers my next question as well, which was, what Innovator International actually looks for in financial projections. So I guess we've got that one covered as well.
It's all in the story.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, you know, I'm I'm very mindful of your time, by the way. So I believe on the innovation, viability, and scalability, we've really highlighted it comprehensively. So the next part I want to talk about is concept validation. And the first question I would have is, how can founders demonstrate potential demand for their solution? Because a lot of these founders, they might not even be in the UK, and
Absolutely.
and it's
Absolutely.
idea stage. So how can they do that?
Well, and yeah, that's probably one of the biggest problems that exists. But I would say, if you're serious about starting a business, Why would you go to a country you don't know with an idea that you haven't tested? And if you're
Yeah.
telling me that you're doing that, I don't believe that you're a genuine entrepreneur with a genuine opportunity. So, LinkedIn's fantastic now. There's always ways to get in touch with people, but we expect it's easy for me to say, well, that's for you to tell me, but we expect the person to identify a specific opportunity, um, to have understood that there's a pain point that the client has and that they would purchase that solution. So, we expect to a degree some sort of market engagement. Now, it may be that your business isn't B2B, it's not business to business, business to consumer, and that the UK public aren't your general market. If you've got no UK market, we'd be saying, why are you moving to the UK? And you may have a reason for that. There may be a good reason. But effectively, we want engagement with your customer base that says, hey, this solution resonates with us, we like it, and we would potentially, or we would purchase it. So we need some sort of engagement that shows. I mean, we had one a while ago, and it was all about brewing a specific alcohol in a new way. It wasn't
Hmm.
whiskey, but let me say whiskey just for the sake of argument. They showed us this new way to produce a certain type of whiskey that had never been done before and could take the market by storm. Now, in that case, the UK is a country of whiskey drinkers. You don't have to prove to me that there are whiskey
Yeah.
drinkers in the UK.
Okay.
But you had to prove to me, that this methodology would work, and you could sell it either through a website or through shops or whatever. And to be fair, this was a brewing business from a different country that had their supply chain mastered. It was a great application. But if you're talking about something where there's competition in the sector, or it's not a clear route to market, we just need some evidence that go back to innovation. There's someone who wants it. There's someone who genuinely wants it and would pay for it. And I hate to say this, it's up for you to tell us how
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
that. But I'd start by using LinkedIn. I'd start by using contacts, industry contacts. I'd say, hey, I've already done this in my country. It works. And I believe the conditions in the UK to be similar. And I've spoken to a few people and they've said they like the solution because it's good research. If you go to these people and they say, I don't really like your solution or it doesn't solve a problem that I have, or I have a problem, but that solution doesn't solve it, you can
Hmm.
then start that conversation and say, well, okay, hey, thanks for talking to me. Can I talk to you a little bit more about what that problem actually is and why my solution doesn't solve it? Because then you're starting to evolve your solution. You've got a better, more realistic and genuine business proposition, and you're engaging with early adopters.
Yeah.
What's not to win about that about that situation? So again, the big thing is engage with your marketplace, not just computer research, not just desk research, not just Google, but let's get
Yeah.
real people who want your solution and are prepared to pay for it.
So I guess, yeah, engagement, that's a very, very good point that you mentioned. I guess some of the most conventional forms of demonstrating that in a business plan would be letters of intent or expressions of
Absolutely.
interest, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
as I said, examples always help a lot. And
Mm,
this is a point where B2C businesses will struggle because let's say
yeah,
if I'm pitching a B2B concept and I get an expression of interest, you or your assessment team, they can go and verify that company on Companies House or
yeah,
through
yeah, yeah,
online
yeah,
digital channels. Whereas with the B2C section, it's hard because
yeah,
I could just make up 20 names in the business plan and I would say,
yeah,
Paul from
absolutely.
Manchester said it's a very good idea.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. And I
yeah,
mean, your B2C research is a lot more valid if you're able to provide any specific individuals who are prepared to give further information, that we could then contact if we wanted to find out. But it's more a case of knowing that you've got to convince us it's sufficiently real. If you convince
right.
us it's sufficiently real, but your research is not genuine, then that could come back to bite you at your 12-month checkpoint because you'll suddenly start to do things and think, oh, hang on a minute, this didn't go the way I want. I'm in the UK, but it's not working. Getting to the UK is not your end goal. Getting to the UK
Yeah.
is the start. Making your business work and getting ILR is your end goal. And that's a
Yes,
bigger step
exactly.
altogether.
Yeah, this nicely brings us to the next point. But Just before I do, so just one last question on this concept validation
Yeah.
aspect. If a founder has raised, because I've worked with a few who have raised VC funding, if they've already raised venture rounds or investments from
Yeah.
external investors, would that, I mean, obviously it's natural to assume, I would assume that it helps the credibility and the
Always.
market demand. Okay.
I mean, the only exception to that rule is if they've raised funding and the source of the funding is questionable, which sort of moves
Mhm.
us on to a later section anyway.
Yeah.
But in general, if they've got any sort of funding from a reputable source, Innovate UK is always a good one as well. But any money from a reputable source, then that effectively says, hey, someone else believes in you as well.
Yes. Yes.
And
The
they're putting their money
reputation
where their
aspect.
mouth is.
Yes, that's a very, very good point. So the next aspect I want to cover is common application mistakes.
Yeah.
And, in your view, because you've dealt with all these applications,
Yeah.
in your view, what would be the most common ones? Obviously, I don't think we can highlight all of them in detail, but
No, no. So I think mistake we can split these into two sections, and the first section is the application simply isn't eligible. It's not suitable for this sector. That's not so much a mistake. There's nothing we can do about that. But let's assume we've got a good applicant, someone like yourself. What mistakes could they make? Where could they shoot themselves in the foot? Um, the first thing I would suggest, this is a bit of a tough one, is choosing a bad business plan writer, because some business plan writers have an amazing ability to turn a great project into a garbage application.
Mhm. Yes.
Um, and they sort of put them in the same field as the applicants who aren't suitable, who've been written a plan where they've really gilded the lily. And I had a CV only a couple of days ago that talked about how they were an executive in a restaurant dealing with the orders and dealing with customer satisfaction and so on. And they basically really egged up that they'd worked behind the counter on a fast food chain. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I'd rather they just say I worked behind the counter on a fast food chain, because when they try and, there's a phrase, gild the lily. When they try and big up that role to make it something that it's not, you then ask, well, what else have they bigged up to make up something that they're not? And when a good applicant goes to that business plan writer, you get a sense you don't know what's happening, and that's where we really need to delve into a good plan and a good applicant from a bad plan and a good applicant. So using the wrong business plan writer is I think a massive step. But if you're writing your own plan, okay, so it's a really good question, this. I'm just going back to the question now. What's the common mistake that they can make? I think, in all honesty, when you have a good plan, um, I would say don't hold back on your experience and don't hold back on what you've done. Because if you try and make it too simplistic, occasionally we'll see a plan from a great applicant and we'll say, I know that applicant is fantastic, but there's something not right with this plan. Um, and in that case, we'll always follow up with questions. We'll always get back in touch with the applicant to say, hey, it's clear that you've got a good idea and a good plan here. Um, what's the situation? What's happening here, or what's happening now? Can you tell us a little bit more about this? So we like to think where we have a good applicant, but the plan's not amazing, we'll see through that and we'll ask questions. Occasionally, we'll refuse, and the applicant will look at the reasons for refusal and say, "Oh, I can't believe I didn't do this or I didn't do that." But that's where they have their chance of a second application to come back to us and say, "Oh, do you know what? I should have given you a bit more information the first time around," and so on. And so I like to think our methods, our methodology weeds out, genuine mistakes and gives them the chance to get that visa. But again, I'd say don't hold back on your experience. Tell us what you've done. Don't lie. You don't have to over egg it, but let us know what you've done. And this goes back to your earlier point. Don't outsource everything. Don't employ where you don't need to employ. And again, there's no need. We see this from certain countries to build an empire. Keep it
Mhm.
simple and grow organically, and just show us how you're going to grow organically over a period of time to make it work. And Yeah, I think that's the big thing. That, the whole make versus buy decision. What do I make and what do I buy? Don't try and make everything in house if it makes more sense to outsource a little, but don't
Yeah.
outsource everything. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
That's a very, very good point. Actually, on the note about business plan writers, because we know there's quite a few now, and
Yeah,
they're increasing on a day-to-day
and there's
basis.
nothing wrong with business plan writers, but
Yes, but yes, a very good point. I mean, so the idea is that using one, because I write some plans, but I
yeah,
only write about 10 every year because I simply don't have the time. But
yeah,
most importantly, my stance on it is that I encourage each client to write their own plan with my supervision, let's say, so I can
so
review it and give
brilliant.
feedback. But I believe writing their own plan, it gives them that ability to envision the business and its roadmap themselves. And if when it
Absolutely.
comes to interview stage, then they can pitch that in a way better way. And generally, entrepreneurship, it's how do you say, it's a DIY project. That's the way I
Yeah,
look at it. So it's
absolutely.
best to adopt that view in the first place.
Yeah.
But of course, the precautions that are ought to be made. So I'm very grateful for that part. Um, you mentioned rejections as well, and this is, I guess, this brings us to nicely towards the end of our discussion before we go into the immigration sector. So, if an applicant is rejected, would you say it's the end? And how does the process work?
No,
One,
far from it, because entrepreneurship's a journey, and my entrepreneurship journey, I was probably in it for 6 or 7 years before I had something sufficiently successful. I mean, people often forget that Innovator International is a project under a business called Gemnus Innovation Limited. Nick, my business partner, and I own Gemnus Innovation Limited. So we're entrepreneurs, no different to the applicants. We have a business that we're building. We have a project that we're going that we're driving. So we understand the journey that the applicants are going through. And is it the end? Absolutely not. Because if you're refused, if your project does not meet the criteria, then I wouldn't pursue that project any further. But if you get your feedback back and you think, "Oh, do you know what, my assessors genuinely misunderstood this. If only I'd have said dot dot dot." And a great example, we had a guy developing some specific specialized sports footwear. And we said, look, I don't believe you can manufacture this for the prices that you've given. And he came back and said, oh, I've actually got some sample pieces from my manufacturer already, and he's given me costs. Why the hell didn't you tell us the first time around? It goes
yeah,
back to the common mistakes.
yeah,
So they told us, and their refusal was overturned. This is the second application, but statistically, only 4% of second applications get approved. Now, I say only 4%. That implies 96% of the time we get the decision right, but where we do get it wrong, we like to correct ourselves. So
hmm
there is a chance where someone has been refused. They've thought, oh, I should have said this or I should have said that, and they've said it, and we've gone back and said, okay, fair enough. We misunderstood it. Most commonly because we weren't presented with enough information first time around, and we didn't ask or it wasn't presented. So 4% of projects get turned around. 4% of refusals get turned around. But then there's nothing wrong with the applicant going away, doing some more research, developing that project further, or using this project as a learning experience, and then coming back sometime later saying, hey, I've taken that on board. It's like when people come back to X Factor in the second year or Pop Idol in the second year. They're allowed to come back. They're better. They're different. They've learned. They've gone away and they've taken their experience on board. What we don't recommend is someone who gets refused applying the next week and saying, hey, I've also had this idea. Because normally people put their best idea forward first. And if
yeah.
that's not approved, then you start to question, well, okay, if this is so good, why didn't you submit it first time around? But so it's certainly not the end of the journey. There are multiple options depending upon whether they believe their assessment was misunderstood or whether they want to go away, learn some more about that specific project, do a bit more research, show there is evidence for it, tailor it, adapt it, or start a totally different project. But I mean, in terms of both parts to that question, it's not the end, and they can reapply. And every applicant gets extensive feedback regarding why they were refused. Rather than trying to argue that and saying, well, that's subjective, I don't agree with you, because
Mhm.
what we provide is expert feedback from people who understand the sector or understand entrepreneurship in that project. I take that feedback on board, and that sort of suggests what changes you should make either to this project or take on board for your next project.
Okay, that's perfect. Now, just to bring clarity regarding your procedure. So, from my understanding, excuse me, the reassessment is not charged. It's provided free of
Absolutely
charge.
not. No, no,
Okay.
it's not charged.
But
Um,
if they, sorry to interrupt you, but if
oh,
they seek to reapply, there is a charge with a new
yeah,
idea.
absolutely. So the second assessment allows us to take into account any information that you didn't present first time around that led
Hmm.
to a misunderstanding. So we're not talking about changes to the project. We're talking about you saying, "Oh, hang on a minute, you've misunderstood that." And is it because I've not explained something, or I need to explain it again, or I need to explain it differently, or provide some more information? So that's the second assessment. If you still disagree, then you can have an appeal. And the appeal takes your project to a separate assessor, but they
Hmm.
take into account the information that the first assessor had, and they reread it and they say, is my opinion the same based on the information presented to me? Now, it sounds bad when I say that there's never been a successful appeal. But on the other hand, what it suggests is we get it right first or second time.
Okay.
96% of the time we get it, well, no, if we don't get it right first time, there's a chance to overturn that, then there's a chance to appeal. But in every case, the appeal assessors looked at it and said, no, I agree with the finding of the original assessor. They've done their job properly here based on the information available. Now, if you want to change the detail, or if you want to substantially change the project, then that's the subject of a full reassessment that has to be paid for again. And that's the Home Office rule.
Okay. Okay. Understood. So, really, the main glimmer of hope is in that reassessment, but ideally, basically, applicants ought to make sure that they present the optimal proposition on the
Absolutely.
first try. That's
Absolutely.
critical.
Absolutely. That's always what makes things better. And to be honest, that huge failure rate for second assessments is mainly because we have business plan factories. Again, to clarify the term, a business plan factory is an organization, it's our term for it, who will take your CV and create a plan for you where you've had
Mhm.
no real input to the plan. They're the ones who promise people an endorsement for normally a huge sum of money. Um, and therefore it's within, and sometimes some of that money is success based. So it's within their interests to do whatever they can to get their client their visa. And I would say the vast majority of second applications come from those organizations. People often ask me, what's the success rate for people applying to you? And my answer is, I can tell you, but it's a very misleading stat, so I'm going to answer it in two ways. Overall, 28% of our applications result in an endorsement, but that's very misleading. That doesn't mean you've got a 28% chance of being successful,
Mhm.
because if I turn that around, I would say it's actually more the case that 100% of the eligible projects get endorsed and 100% of the ineligible projects get refused. That 28% just reflects the numerical
What's the
difference in the
difference?
number of applications. So if it's a good project, if it's eligible, you will get endorsed. If it's ineligible, you won't. And that's where the stats can be very, very misleading.
Yes, yes, that's very true. Now, you mentioned business plan factories, and this, I would say, this is one thing that my goal in this video was to raise more awareness about the current practices and malpractices in the immigration sector, as we said, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
So I would love to, because there's a range of bad actors in every industry, and the immigration industry is certainly not an exception at all.
Yeah.
So, what's your overall take about the immigration industry, and perhaps even from a
Okay.
personal point of view, I would love to get your insights on what precautions applicants ought to take before applying.
Yeah. Okay. So clearly, there's different types of organisation, different qualities of organisation, and for me, for each immigration company, we've also got to separate immigration companies with business plan writers who aren't immigration companies but develop ideas for you. Now, I've probably got so much to say here. I'm just going to throw in a few thoughts and ideas. But you might have an excellent entrepreneur that with an excellent idea that's just not very good at articulating that on paper, and they need help. So there's a place for genuine business plan writers, but this comes back to the type of applicants that an immigration firm will get. In my opinion, I might be wrong here. I think you get people who say, "Hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I've got this excellent idea. I want to build it in the UK." Fantastic. You've then got people who say, I want to be in the UK to be with, for example, my kids, or for the education system, or for healthcare. I do have an idea that could work in entrepreneurship. Is that visa suitable for me? I mean, it may be the case sometimes that the immigration specialist will say, have you got any entrepreneurial aspirations, or could you be an entrepreneur? So going back, we've got the person who is a genuine entrepreneur, the person who wants to come into the UK and may have a suitable project, and then you have people who just want to come into the UK and don't have suitable projects. And they're the ones who, through desperation, tend to go to the business plan factories and say, get me in, get me an endorsement, get me a visa. And business plan factory will say, right, okay, tell me what you've done in your life, tell me what you've done in your career, and we'll create you a CV and a project that we believe will meet the criteria. So there are some absolutely amazing, phenomenal immigration specialists out there, and they're the ones we want to give the majority of our time to, because they're the ones who come forward with the suitable applicants who are eligible for this program. Now, we also understand that there are immigration specialists out there who are acting on behalf of their clients, as they obviously would, trying to get them into the UK. And they may put speculative applications into this route that may be suitable, may not be suitable. And, we work closely with a lot of those people for the sake of the genuine applicants that they support. But then there is an element out there who exploit, unfortunately. And in the last few weeks, you've probably seen this on my LinkedIn. I've seen emails that I've sent, that I've not sent, have been fabricated, endorsement letters that have been fabricated, and refusal letters that have been fabricated purely for the sake of extorting more money out of the client, which is why we always say a client should apply directly to us and deal directly with us, and we will always involve the immigration specialist within that process. If you're receiving correspondence that from a third party that says it's from Innovator International, check with us directly, because if I'm dealing with you and one of your clients, I will say to you, look, for the sake of the program and the rules, I need to deal directly with the client, but we're happy to keep you in the loop, because you are clearly helping a genuine person on their genuine entrepreneurial journey.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So direct communication would be perhaps the most crucial tip for every applicant.
Absolutely. Well, it prevents any falsification and fraudulent documents from the client's perspective. Now, I know you well enough to know that's not your game. You would never be within that field. But we can't apply one set of rules to the people we trust and another set of rules to
Yeah,
the people we're not so sure about. So,
absolutely.
we have to say one rule suits all, and please deal directly with us.
Yes, absolutely. And to be honest, it's crazy. I mean, that this I've seen crazy things in my life, but this was,
Yeah.
I have to say, it's going to be in the top five, to be honest, in this
There are
sector.
scary sums of money changing hands for business plans, and we're talking things like 10, 20,000 pound in some
Yeah,
cases.
yeah. I mean, I've had people's actually offering that those ranges of figures to me,
Yeah,
saying, just get me the idea, get me the visa, get me
yeah,
everything, which I had to do an entire video on, and
yeah.
saying,
I
please do
remember.
not come to me with these requests. I
Yep, yep,
cannot
yep,
help you.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's
But
very,
that's what will put you in the elite category of the immigration specialist, dealing with the right people for the right reasons.
yeah. I mean, obviously, because with the UK rules, you need to be regulated by the IAA, or the Solicitors Regulation Authority. So that's what my immigration partner, who is regulated, takes care of. My
Yeah.
assistance is purely on the commercial aspect, especially the business plan and marketing strategy, etc. So, Richard, as I said, I'm very mindful of your time. So this brings me to the final section that I wanted to discuss, and that is the post-endorsement stage. Because as you said, the end goal is not the first endorsement. The end goal is the ILR, and
Yeah.
obviously scaling the business. So what should applicants demonstrate during the two checkpoints that you hold with them?
Okay, that's a good one. So again, quite a simple one. We want to see that they've made progress against their plan, but also that they've put the amount of time in that reflects that progress. So if they come out at you after a year and say, "Hey, I've written a website, fairly basic website, not done anything else, not got any sales," then you're thinking, well, does that really reflect 12 months of your time? You're looking back at what they wrote in their plan. Sure, we're appreciating that they've also had to move to the UK, settle in the UK, set up their business, their bank account, their phones, and everything else, and they might not have achieved what they thought they would have achieved. But as long as we're seeing progress that reflects the time input, then that's good. And the 12-month is often a shocking point for entrepreneurs to say, "Oh my word, this was a lot harder than I thought." It's another chance for us to tell them what we do and how we can help them. But we're looking for progress that is reasonably aligned to their business plan. So their business plan is
Mhm.
the benchmark.
Right, right. So let's say if an applicant in the first 12 months or in 24 months, if they don't achieve those milestones, and I'm assuming that the answer is, again, it's very, the circumstances are unique to each founder, but if they don't achieve it, then there is the risk of their endorsement being withdrawn, if I'm correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Although we very rarely do that because only in a couple of cases has an applicant said to us, "Oh, they've done very, very little." And then there's a possibility they've got a full-time job or something like that as well, which I know comes in a moment. But again, it's have they genuinely spent the majority of their time developing their business? And you can normally tell that by what they've achieved. If someone's had 12 months and they've done very, very little, you've got to question what time they've put in. Now, we'll be a little bit more, um, what's the word? We'll be a little bit stricter at the 24-month checkpoint.
Hmm.
We should have learned even more and achieved even more by then. But if we feel that either the business isn't working or they're not making sufficient progression, then yes, we do have the right to withdraw the visa. But in most cases, we'd rather have a conversation that says, look, why is it not going to plan? And what do you need to help you get it back on track? And can we provide that help or can someone else provide that help? But ultimately, if people come on, they have this visa and they're clearly flaunting the conditions of the visa route. They're not putting time into their business, or it's quite clear that their business is simply not going to be successful, and they're not doing anything about that. Then yes, the endorsement can be withdrawn. Will's a harsh word because it depends upon their will and their skill to change things and get it back on track. But it certainly can be withdrawn, and there are cases where we have withdrawn it.
Okay, absolutely. That's great. So really, it re-emphasizes the point about having realistic goals and milestones in the
Yeah, there's
business
a
plan.
contract. And I mean, the government have said, hey, you can come into the UK to build your business, but your half of the contract is that you build that business. That's what you've signed up to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned paid employment. This brings
Yeah.
us nicely to the last section of the call. So I am aware that applicants can engage in paid employment, although this is up to my immigration advisor to advise if anybody has questions about those. But just I wanted to hear it from you that,
Okay.
can they work per the rules? They might be able
Okay.
to, but what are
Well,
the
so we can't give any visa advice, and I think this comes down to visa conditions. But my opinion and interpretation, based on the guidance for endorsing bodies, is applicants can have paid employment. I'm pretty sure it's to sustain their salary or to sustain their cost of living while they're building their business. You shouldn't come over on this visa route if your intent is to get a job somewhere
right,
else.
of
Because the
course.
purpose of the paid employment is purely to sustain your cost of living until your business is can pay your way. Now, that's not written that way in the rules, but that is the spirit of this visa route. So you can have paid employment. I think it has to be at a certain level, and we
Hmm.
like to see it ideally in a field that's connected to your application anyway. And again, that's not written in the rules either, but that gives you a greater case should it ever be brought into question. But there is a level of job that's required. I'm not sure how those levels actually work, but they will be detailed in the visa conditions. And again, for us, it's always better if it's in a relevant field. But again, even if someone has employment and we're aware of this at the point of a checkpoint, we'll be saying, well, okay, what's your plans to whittle down that employment and get some revenue into the business? Because if you've got a business that's making money, you don't need employment somewhere else. So the big question is how can you get your business to a point where it's making money and therefore you don't need employment? But it's permitted as a means. It's permitted at certain levels as a means to help you meet your cost of living.
Okay, that's very clear. So I guess perhaps we would urge every applicant, if they have questions regarding this one from a visa point of view, to refer to a regulated immigration advisor to get clarity on that.
Because again, there are restrictions. I mean, one of them is in the field of sport. I don't think you can work as an active sports person or sports coach. One example. There are other restrictions again, but that's more in the realm of your business partner, visa specialist.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Richard. As I said, I am mindful of your time. I presume you had some other commitments now, but thank you very much for this. And not only was it a pleasure to actually speak with you for the first time, one-on-one at least, but I believe this is very helpful for applicants, and highlights a lot of the realities surrounding this visa. So I'm truly grateful for your time today.
And the pleasure's been all mine. Again, we're always keen to help people who are supporting applicants for the right reasons, and I know you fall into that category. So it's always my pleasure. And if ever you want to follow up, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. And that brings us to a conclusion. Once again, I would like to sincerely thank Richard for his time, and I believe this video would be very helpful for all prospective applicants, and it clarifies a lot of the vague and ambiguous questions that they may have during the endorsement application stage. A final note from me is, if you're seeking immigration advice, because one thing that's very different with startup visas is, I believe, it's my personal opinion, that you require both commercial and immigration expertise. And commercial expertise is what I provide as a business consultant. However, when it comes to immigration advice, one, I would say, important word of advice to all applicants is, if you're seeking to use an advisor, please make sure that they're regulated by the Immigration Advice Authority in the UK. Do not use unregulated immigration advisors. That's a word of advice, and that's something that my business partner, Dennis Menabit, provides, and she is regulated by the Immigration Advice Authority and possesses several years of experience in the immigration sector. I hope you enjoyed that video, and more to come. See you later.